Hi, this is J.R. Wright. You might remember me from Group 3. I'll be doing this presentation on Canada's cybersecurity risk assessment, and this has to do with the telecommunications sector, which is the company Avistel. So now I'll give a brief overview of what the telecommunications sector is currently doing for authorization. So the first thing we're going to go over is authentication. Next, authorization. After that, it'll be access control, followed by weaknesses in cybersecurity, which will be further broken down into people, technology, and policy. Then we'll be going over recommendations we can make to improve our cybersecurity, and also going over attack vector and attribution analysis. Authentication. So I'll start with the NIST definition of authentication, which is verifying the identity of a user, process, or device, often as a prerequisite to allowing access to resources in an information system. So the telecommunications sector uses a multi-factor authentication, which usually consists of something you know, such as a password or PIN, something you have, such as a token, and also something you are, such as biometrics. Next, we'll go over biometrics, and biometrics can be anything such as fingerprints, voice identification, or retinal or facial identification. If you have an iPhone, you might have one of those on it. Next, we also use tokens, which are usually RFID or some type of login credentials. Lastly, we utilize a registration authority and credential service provider. So basically, a registration authority is someone that verifies your identity. Usually these could be like your personal information, and after that, after they've verified your identity, they will request certain certificates from a credential service provider, which will prove that it is you trying to log onto a server. Next, we'll be going over authorization. So authorization is basically what determines what permissions a user has. And what permissions are what a user can do and also what they can see on our systems. This is further broken down into user accounts, which are customers will use to access their information and what they need to see and do. And we also have our own staff accounts, which can obtain some information from user accounts, but only for marketing and performance purposes. All right, now I'll be going over the access control strategy of the telecommunications sector. So access control is concerned with determining the allowed activities of legitimate users, mediating every attempt by a user to access a resource in the system. So a resource is any information that we're looking to protect via access control. And we do this by utilizing access control lists, which break down all of our users and staff into subjects, and we list what objects they're able to access. This is further built into our access control matrix, which is a visualization of all of our subjects and what objects they're allowed to access. Next, we'll go over the access control system. So this is built up with our policies, mechanisms, and models. And what policies are high-level requirements in regards to access control. Our mechanisms are the ways we perform the access control, such as table lookups to either grant or deny access to certain areas in our system. And also models are basically a bridge between our mechanisms and our policies, and they kind of control our security policy. Next, we'll go over separation of duty. So separation of duties ensures that someone doesn't have conflicting roles in regards to access control. Next, we also have a mandatory access control system. And what that is that a centralized authority can determine if certain information is secret, top secret, or confidential. And a owner of that information cannot control the level of security that that information possesses. And lastly, we utilize role-based access control. Role-based access control is basically a parameter that people can only access information that is dictated by their position. Next, I'll be going over the weaknesses in organization security. So telecommunications providers are under fire from two sides. They face direct attacks from cyber criminals intent on breaching their organization and network operations, and also indirect attacks from those in pursuit of user information. So our weaknesses are broken down into people, technology, and policy. So with people, we're on the lookout for social engineering, which is manipulating people into giving up their information. This could be posing as a staff member or someone high in our organization to gain information. Phishing, which would be deceptive types of emails, malware that's infected our systems, and also insider threats, which could be people within the organization divulging information. And lately there's been ransomware, which is where a cyber criminal can basically blackmail someone into giving up information. Next, we'll get into our technology weaknesses, which consist of we're vulnerable to distributed denial of service attacks, which is where cyber criminals flood our systems, making our servers crash or inoperable. User authentication hacking, which basically involves our users' either authentication information being taken over, or it could be like a session hijacking where someone tries to present themselves as a legitimate user. We also have to be on the lookout for backdoors, which are basically ways that hackers leave open in our system to steal information or disrupt our operations. And also trusted and safe script exploits. So this would involve any websites that at first seem secure or can possess the trusted symbols, but they actually have exploits. Lastly, we have weaknesses in our policy, which could include unpatched security vulnerabilities and also people having admin account privileges. All right, next we'll be going over recommendations that the telecommunications industry will implement or continue to follow. And the first one is multi-factor authentication. We're going to continue that policy of using multiple factors to ensure that the correct person is accessing our system. Next, we'll be setting permissions, which is going to be a main thing in our access control. Also, we'll be using our access matrix and access control lists. We'll be utilizing scheduled patch update audits. So we'll be going over, basically looking over all of our inventory and making sure all the computers are patched and up to date. We'll be implementing a policy of least privilege, which is ensuring that people only have access to information that is needed to perform their position. Next, we'll continue to inventory all of our assets because determining what needs to be protected will pretty much shape our security policy. A new thing we want to implement is penetration testing. That will involve identifying our weak points in our cybersecurity. Also, we'll continue to have firewalls to sift through what type of traffic we're letting into our system. And also, we'll be implementing a intrusion detection protection systems, or IDPS, which we'll use to detect suspicious traffic and also stop and prevent cyber attacks. Another thing we'd like to implement is the security information and event management. And this is basically recording any sort of events on our servers, and it allows us to reread those events in case of incident response or after action reviews. And lastly, we'll be utilizing encryption, especially for sensitive information. Next, I'll be going over attack vectors, and these are different ways that the telecommunication system can be attacked. So the first is human, so this can be any sort of cyber criminals or insider attacks. Next is natural, which involves natural disasters such as tornadoes and hurricanes. Technical, which could be any sort of mechanical failure, such as a server going down. Physical, which is a breakdown of physical security. Environmental, which could be chemical or biological or a virus. And lastly, operational, which would be anything that disrupts the operations of the telecommunications sector. This will conclude the presentation. I went over our authentication, authorization, access control, weaknesses in our organization security, recommendations we had to continue and also to implement, and lastly, we went over attack vectors. Thank you for seeing my presentation. Goodbye.